Title: Doctor denied until the patient spoke. Part 1. Is there a doctor on board? Dr. Malcolm Ellison was not the type of man to seek attention. He liked clean suits, quiet mornings, and crossword puzzles. At 38, he had built a calm, reliable life as an ER physician in Washington, D.C. Long shifts, short naps, and the knowledge that most days he got to put a little more good into the world than he took out. But on that April afternoon, somewhere above the Midwest at 37,000 feet, Malcolm Ellison was about to become a headline. Flight 727 from Chicago to Atlanta was uneventful, until it wasn't. Malcolm was seated in 14A, window seat, earbuds in, reading The Warmth of Other Suns. The hum of the engines was a kind of lullaby. Then it happened. A gasp, a sudden flurry of movement in row 22. A woman screamed, and a voice rang out, "Is there a doctor on board?" Malcolm didn't hesitate. He stood up, pulled out his earbuds, and raised his hand. "I'm a doctor." The flight attendant, a young white woman with a tight bun and clipboard in hand, looked him over. Her eyes dropped to his hoodie, his jeans, his clean sneakers. "You're a doctor?" she asked, skeptical. Malcolm kept his tone calm. "Yes, emergency medicine, DC General. Can you take me to the passenger?" She blinked, then hesitated. "Do you have any ID?" Malcolm froze for a half second. "I have my license in my bag, but I can't let just anyone." Another attendant approached, whispering urgently, "She's going into shock." Malcolm looked her dead in the eyes. "Then we don't have time for this." Row 22, seat E, an elderly woman, mid-70s, pale, sweating, barely conscious. Malcolm knelt beside her, checked her pulse. Rapid but thready, skin clammy, breathing shallow. He turned to the attendant. "I need the emergency kit and oxygen now." Arnold, the skeptical attendant, hovered. "I'm going to need to verify oxygen now." She flinched, then finally ran. Another passenger, a nurse from Detroit, jumped in to help. "Thank God," she whispered to Malcolm. "You're the real deal." Malcolm worked with calm precision. He administered oxygen, checked blood sugar, talked to the woman through the panic, took her vitals, reassured the husband sitting beside her. Within minutes, the woman stabilized. Her color returned. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you?" Malcolm smiled. "Just doing my job." The skeptical flight attendant reappeared, this time with a security folder and a forced smile. "I apologize, doctor. Ellison, was it? Thank you for your assistance. Just doing our due diligence." Malcolm nodded, though something twisted in his chest. He didn't say what he was thinking. "Would you have asked for ID if I looked different?" The plane landed safely in Atlanta. Paramedics boarded and took the woman for evaluation. Her husband shook Malcolm's hand with both of his. "You saved my wife," he said, voice trembling. "She'll be okay," Malcolm said, "but she should follow up with her doctor. It may have been a mini-stroke." Passengers around them began clapping. Some stood, but Malcolm just wanted to get off the plane. Someone had recorded it, not the treatment, but the moment when Malcolm offered help and the flight attendant refused. The clip, just under 30 seconds, showed her saying, "Do you have any ID?" And Malcolm, cool but urgent, "We don't have time for this." The caption read, "Doctor tries to save a life. Flight attendant questions if he's really a doctor. Guess why?" It had over 1.2 million views by the time Malcolm reached baggage claim. Twitter blew up. "Racism at 37,000 feet. Disgusting. Would they have asked for ID if he were white? We know the answer. This man deserves an apology and a medal." I hope the airline is ready for this PR disaster. By the next morning, Malcolm's name was trending. The airline, one of the largest in the country, released a bland statement. "We are aware of an incident involving a passenger medical emergency. Our crew followed protocol, and we thank those who assisted. We are reviewing our procedures." No apology, no mention of race, just corporate fog. Then the unexpected happened. The woman Malcolm had treated, her name was Lillian Morse, gave a phone interview from her hospital bed. "That doctor saved my life. I don't care what he looked like. I care that he knew what he was doing. And he did. That flight attendant made him prove it while I couldn't breathe." The interview went viral. The airline couldn't ignore it anymore. Interviews, requests, book deals, speaking engagements. Malcolm wasn't interested. He hadn't done this for attention. He just wanted to be believed. He told a reporter, "I stepped up because it was the right thing to do. But being questioned for doing my job, that's not new. That's reality. I'm just sorry someone had to almost die for people to believe that." Part 2. More than just a seat on the plane. Dr. Malcolm Ellison sat in his apartment with the TV on mute. His name was on the screen. Again. He sipped tea, stared at the caption. Black doctor denied chance to help. Saves woman's life anyway. There were talking heads debating him, analyzing him, praising him, and all he could think was, I never wanted to be a symbol. The airline finally issued a second statement. Longer, more polished, still disappointing. We thank Dr. Ellison for his quick response and professionalism. We are reviewing our crew training and procedures. Still no apology, no accountability, just spin. The word race wasn't mentioned once. While the corporation played defense, people showed up in Malcolm's inbox. Hundreds of them. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, students, all of them black or brown. All of them with stories. They made me show my ID in scrubs. A white nurse called me the janitor during rounds. They asked if I was the translator. I'm the attending. They asked if I was really a dentist in my own office. Malcolm read every one. Some made him angry. Some broke his heart. But all of them confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't about him. It was about all of them. A few days later, there was a knock at his door. It was Lillian Morse, the woman whose life he saved. She stood in his doorway with a warm smile and a cane. I tracked you down through the hospital, she said. Malcolm blinked, surprised. You didn't have to do that. She smiled wider. I wanted to look my doctor in the eye and say thank you. He welcomed her in. They sat at his kitchen table sipping tea. Lillian placed her hand over his and said, Don't let them make you small. You stood tall when I couldn't even breathe. Don't forget that. A reporter from The Atlantic requested a sit-down interview. She promised it would be respectful, thorough, and led by his words, not someone else's spin. Malcolm agreed. They met in a quiet cafe. She asked gentle, thoughtful questions. What did you feel when the attendant questioned you? Why didn't you walk away? What needs to change? Not just in the air, but on the ground? Malcolm answered carefully, honestly. I stayed because someone needed help. That's what doctors do. But the truth is, I shouldn't have had to fight through doubt to give someone care. I'm not asking to be celebrated. I'm asking to be trusted. The article dropped 3 days later. It was titled, Trusted to Save Lives, Doubted Anyway. And it shook the internet. The pressure grew too big to ignore. Civil rights organizations called for accountability. Medical associations released statements of support. Even flight crews spoke up, anonymously admitting that implicit bias training was outdated, inconsistent, or non-existent. Finally, the airline's CEO released a personal video statement. We failed. We failed Dr. Ellison. We failed our passengers. And we're changing our training protocols immediately. Dr. Ellison, if you're listening, we apologize and we thank you. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The airline reached out privately and invited Malcolm to consult on a new training initiative. They offered a stipend, full creative input, and his choice of who else would be in the room. He called his mentor, Dr. Grace Bellamy, the first black attending he ever shadowed. They're trying, Malcolm said, but I don't know if they mean it. She replied, then go and make them mean it. Malcolm walked into a sleek conference room weeks later, dressed in a Navy suit, laptop in hand. Around the table, executives, DEI consultants, HR directors, mostly white. All of them waited for him to speak. He did, not with anger, not with rage, but with facts and stories and clarity. This can't just be about not embarrassing the company again. It has to be about changing how you see who's qualified to help, because one day someone's life might depend on that. Again. They worked with Malcolm to build a new initiative. Clear cultural awareness, leveling assumptions, empowered intervention, acknowledging bias, responding with respect. It became mandatory for all cabin crew within 4 months. Malcolm returned to work. His team greeted him like royalty. Claps, hugs, a sign above the break room that read, "Our doctor, our hero." He just laughed. "Let's save some lives," he said. One night, as Malcolm left the hospital, he passed a father and son in the lobby. The boy stared at him, wide-eyed. The dad whispered something to the child. The boy walked up and said, "You're the doctor from the plane?" Malcolm nodded. The boy smiled. "I want to be like you." Malcolm knelt down, looked him in the eyes. "You already can." Part 3. Between headlines and healing weeks passed. The story cooled. The media moved on, as it always does. But for Dr. Malcolm Ellison, nothing went back to normal, because everything had changed. Back at the hospital, patients recognized him, some subtly, some not so much. One woman refused to see any other doctor. A teenage girl asked for a selfie after her discharge paperwork. Even nurses from other departments started shadowing his rounds. He smiled through it. But sometimes when he caught someone staring, he wondered, do they see a doctor? Or do they see the guy from the plane? One morning, Malcolm opened an email from a high school in Detroit. Subject line, "Request to speak, our kids need you." Inside, we're a majority black public school with a pre-health pathway. Most of our students have never met a doctor who looks like them. They watched your story in class. We'd be honored if you'd speak to them, virtually or in person. We can't pay, but we can promise they'll never forget it. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He replied, "Yes." A week later, he stood in front of 30 high schoolers in hoodies, braids, Air Jordans, and shy smiles. They didn't ask about fame. They asked about fear. Were you scared when she didn't believe you? Did you ever want to quit med school? Do you ever feel like people only see your skin? Malcolm answered each one honestly. Then he said, "There will be people who question your worth, but the most powerful thing you can do is keep showing up anyway. Because when you do, you change what they thought they knew." The airline invited Malcolm to observe their first clear training rollout in Chicago. He sat in the back, arms crossed, listening. The instructor, a black woman named Jada with the voice of a poet, walked the room through real scenarios, including his. She said, "Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like, 'Are you sure?' Sometimes it looks like hesitation instead of help. But if someone is trying to save a life, your job is simple. Get out of their way." Malcolm felt the room shift. This was working. After the session, a veteran flight attendant approached him. White, early 60s, soft Southern accent. "I wasn't the one on your flight," she said, "but I've been that woman before." Malcolm stayed silent. She continued, "I assumed. I hesitated. I've even asked for ID. Not because I'm hateful, but because I was raised to expect doctors to look a certain way. I'm sorry, and I'm changing." Malcolm reached out, shook her hand. "That's all I ever wanted. Podcasts, news panels, even a documentary crew. They all wanted Malcolm, but this time he said no. Instead, he wrote, he started journaling his experiences, stories from the ER, reflections on race and medicine. Eventually, it turned into essays, and those essays turned into a book. Title, "First, Do No Harm, Then Be Seen." He finally accepted one invitation, a late-night show hosted by a black comedian who balanced humor with razor-sharp social commentary. The host asked, "Dr. Ellison, when that flight attendant doubted you, did you ever think you'd be sitting here, book deal and all?" Malcolm smiled. "Honestly, I just wanted to make sure the woman in 22E didn't die. Everything else is just turbulence." The crowd laughed, but Malcolm knew it wasn't a joke. He received a message from the flight attendant, the one who questioned him. Subject line, "If you'll read this." It was long, careful, emotional. "I want to apologize. I was wrong. I've watched the video 100 times. I don't like what I see. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to learn. Thank you for saving her, and for saving me from staying ignorant." Malcolm didn't reply right away, but he saved the email, and maybe, one day, he'd respond. Weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived. From Lillian Morse. "Dr. Ellison, I'm doing well. My heart is stronger. My spirit too." They asked what I remember most about that flight. I said, not the fear, not the altitude, but the man who knelt beside me when others hesitated. Thank you for your hands, and thank you for your strength. Lily and Malcolm smiled, and for the first time in weeks he let himself cry. That night, as he stood brushing his teeth, Malcolm looked in the mirror and asked himself, am I just the guy from the plane? Then slowly he answered, no, I'm the doctor who refused to sit still, and that will always mean something. Part 4. Not a hero, just a healer. Malcolm hadn't seen the sky in days. Interviews, panels, Zoom events, book signings. Everywhere he went, there were lights, microphones, headlines. The doctor who spoke up, medicine meets activism, healing while black. People kept calling him a hero, but all Malcolm wanted was to be a healer. His publisher loved the buzz. Your story has legs, they said. You should start a podcast, another suggested. Run for office, joked a well-meaning friend. But the joke didn't land, because beneath the applause, Malcolm was tired. Not just physically, emotionally. He hadn't seen a patient in over 2 weeks. His white coat gathered dust. And every night he wondered, am I still the doctor I trained to be? The irony came quietly. Malcolm was at a grocery store picking out apples when he heard a scream. A woman collapsed near the freezer section. Crowd forming. Someone shouted, "When is there a doctor?" Malcolm stepped forward without thinking, just like on the plane. He knelt down, checked her pulse, rolled her gently to her side, started giving instructions until paramedics arrived. Quick, calm, routine. He walked away before anyone asked for his name. That night he returned to work. His chief welcomed him back with a nod. Been a while, star boy. Malcolm smiled. Let's get back to it. His first patient was a little girl with a high fever and frightened parents. He crouched beside her bed, gently taking her vitals, reassuring her with a calm voice and a hand squeeze. When she smiled, weak but trusting, Malcolm felt something return. Purpose. Not platform, not politics. Purpose. His story had reached the residents. They watched how he handled cases, asked him questions after rounds. One of them, a young Indian-American intern named Rima, asked him quietly, "How did you learn to stay calm when everyone else is doubting you?" He smiled. "Because my job isn't to convince people I belong here. It's to save the person in front of me. Everything else can wait." Then it happened again. A black female doctor on another flight offered help during a medical emergency and was refused. Video. Outrage. Hashtag. Let doctors help people tagged Malcolm. Some demanded he speak. Some asked why he hadn't said anything. Malcolm took a breath. He reached out privately to the woman. They spoke for an hour, shared stories, frustrations, resilience. She said, "They only believe us when we go viral." Malcolm replied, "That's why we build more than outrage. We build systems." The next day, Malcolm received an unexpected call. The U.S. Surgeon General. "Dr. Ellison, I want your help, not just on airlines, on implicit bias across medicine. A national task force, real funding, policy impact." Malcolm agreed, but on one condition: "I don't want to be the face. I want to be part of the framework." The Surgeon General laughed. Smart, humble, and rare. Back home, Malcolm visited his mother. She served him tea like always, sat down, then asked the one question no journalist had. "Are you okay, baby?" Malcolm stared at the cup in his hands. "I don't know, Mom. I thought I wanted to be heard. Now that I am, I miss just being needed." She smiled. "You're still needed, but now by more people." He visited another school, this time in Baltimore. An 8-year-old girl named Zoe ran up, hugging his legs. "You're the one who made doctors brave." Malcolm knelt down. "I didn't make us brave, Zoe. I just reminded people we already were." That night, Malcolm sat at his desk. 2 folders, one labeled media contracts, one labeled hospital renewal. He chose the second, then texted his publisher. "Thank you, I'm stepping back. No tour, no docuseries. I'm going home, to the ER." Before bed, he opened his journal. He wrote, "Fame fades, anger burns out, but healing stays. So I will too." He closed the journal, set it beside his stethoscope, and finally slept soundly. Part 5. Healing on the Ground. The ER didn't care about headlines. It didn't care about fame, followers, or controversy. It only cared about one thing: urgency. And that was exactly why Dr. Malcolm Ellison came back. The shift started with a gunshot wound, then an asthma attack, then a toddler with a peanut allergy. Malcolm moved from bay to bay like he never left. The team welcomed him back not as a celebrity, but as one of their own. It was exactly what he needed. During a quiet hour between codes, an older nurse named Jo leaned against the counter beside him. "You look lighter," she said. Malcolm chuckled. "I should be exhausted." "No, not that. I mean your eyes. You're back in your rhythm." He nodded. "I think I remembered why I chose this." One night, a woman came into the ER sobbing, mid-30s, high blood pressure, racing heart. Malcolm sat beside her, gently running tests and listening as she spoke. "My brother died on a plane last year," she said. "They said no one helped him." Malcolm looked her in the eye. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm here now. You're not alone." She squeezed his hand. "I believe you." That one sentence reminded him of everything he'd fought for. Despite stepping away from media, Malcolm continued advising the FAA task force. Every Friday evening, he joined quiet Zoom calls with experts across the country: Black doctors, Native American EMTs, Muslim nurses, Asian American paramedics. They weren't making noise. They were making structure. They were rewriting how bias was measured, how it was reported, and, most importantly, how it was corrected. And Malcolm didn't need cameras for that. He just needed a seat at the table. Weeks after the incident faded from the news cycle, Malcolm finally responded to the email from the flight attendant, the one who had doubted him. He wrote, "Thank you for writing to me. I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. I forgive you, not because it didn't hurt, but because we can't build a better system if we stay in silence and shame. We build it through truth, through growth, through conversations like this one." She replied the same day, "I cried reading this. Thank you for your grace. I'm trying to be better, I promise." Malcolm sat quietly for a while, then whispered, "That's how change begins." Georgetown Medical School called. They wanted him to give the commencement address. Malcolm laughed. "You know I hate speeches." "You don't need to give a speech," the dean said. "Just tell your truth." Standing before hundreds of white-coated graduates, Malcolm looked out at future surgeons, pediatricians, anesthesiologists, and so many faces that reminded him of his own first day. He said, "There will be people who won't believe you're a doctor, not because you're unqualified, but because they've never imagined someone like you holding that kind of power. But you don't have to fight them. You just have to show up anyway, and let your work speak louder than their doubt." The auditorium erupted, but Malcolm didn't smile for the applause. He smiled because of the spark in those students' eyes. After the ceremony, a teenage boy lingered near the stage. He wasn't a graduate, just someone who'd snuck in from the nearby high school. He finally walked up, shy. "Dr. Ellison, I'm Jason. I'm 15. I saw your story online." Malcolm nodded. "You thinking about medicine?" Jason shrugged. "Kinda. But I don't know. I don't really see people like me in the white coat." Malcolm reached into his pocket and handed him a pen. "I used this to write my first prescription." Jason held it like it was gold. Malcolm smiled. "You don't have to see it first. Sometimes you get to be the first." Malcolm received a voicemail from Lillian Morse, the woman he'd saved on that flight nearly a year ago. Her voice was steady. "Dr. Ellison, I just wanted you to know. I turned 76 today. My family threw a party. I danced. I laughed. I'm alive. And I remember why. You made sure I didn't become another incident. You treated me like I mattered. I hope you know. You matter too." Malcolm played the message twice, then saved it. That night, after a 12-hour shift, Malcolm walked out of the hospital into the humid DC air. No cameras, no applause. Just the low buzz of traffic and the soft hum of healing still echoing behind him. He looked up. A plane blinked across the sky. And for once, it didn't remind him of trauma. It reminded him of hope, and of something Lillian once said. "You didn't just save me. You reminded people how to see again. Part 6. Echoes and Emergencies. Spring was easing into summer. The days got longer, the nights busier, and Dr. Malcolm Ellison's life, for all its new layers, was starting to feel balanced again. Between shifts at the hospital and advisory work with the FAA task force, he kept a quiet rhythm. Less noise, more impact. He liked it that way. A local medical school launched a pilot mentorship initiative, pairing pre-med students of color with practicing physicians who understood the unspoken weight of being the only one in the room. They named the program after Malcolm's flight number, Program 727, Flight Toward Equity. Malcolm volunteered immediately. He was assigned 3 mentees, but one stood out. Ava Jackson, 22, top of her class, smart, focused, but guarded. When they first met, she said, "I'm not interested in being anyone's token." Malcolm smiled. "Good. Neither am I." Over time, she opened up. She told him stories of professors mispronouncing her name, patients assuming she was a tech. One even asked her to fetch coffee. "Every time I speak up, they say I'm too aggressive," she confessed. Malcolm nodded. "They used to say I was too calm to be in charge." She laughed. "We can't win, huh?" He shook his head. "Not on their terms, so we make our own." Malcolm was invited to keynote a national medical ethics conference in New York. The theme, Bias in Medicine When Healing Meets Hurdles. He declined at first, but Ava, now his fiercest critic and fiercest supporter, challenged him. "You taught me to speak up," she said, "so go do it. Again." He agreed. The ballroom was packed. Doctors, students, policymakers. Malcolm stepped up to the podium and paused. No speech in hand, just truth. "I saved a woman on a flight, and I was doubted, not because of my training, but because of my skin. What's worse, that it happened, or that it wasn't the first time?" He paused. Bias isn't just personal, it's institutional. It's in who we promote, who we believe, who we listen to. And it's time we stop pretending it's invisible just because it's common. The crowd rose, not out of excitement, but out of recognition. Later that evening, during a student panel, Ava stood at the mic. She told her story, bold, unapologetic. She ended with, "Dr. Ellison didn't teach me to be fearless. He taught me that fear shouldn't decide whether I use my voice." Malcolm stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, heart full. The next week during his shift, a patient coded, "Young man, car accident, internal bleeding." It was chaos. Malcolm led the team, shouting orders, hands steady, eyes sharp. They saved him. But as the room cleared, he felt his knees buckle. The nurse caught him. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just give me a sec." Later in the break room, he sat alone, breathing, sweating, shaken. Not from the case, but from the realization he hadn't let himself feel human in months. He called Dr. Grace Bellamy, his old mentor. "I think I'm burning out," he said. She replied, "Of course you are. You've been carrying a movement and a hospital." "You're not failing, Malcolm. You're feeling. That's human." He laughed softly. "Why does that scare me more than any emergency?" She didn't hesitate. "Because when you've been taught to survive in silence, healing feels like weakness. But it's not. It's proof you're still here." He took a weekend off. No calls, no panels, no emails. He drove to a quiet cabin in the Shenandoah Mountains. No Wi-Fi, no buzz, just him, a journal, and silence. He wrote one sentence on the first page. "What does life look like when I'm not trying to prove I deserve to be here?" He sat with the question for hours, didn't answer it, just let it echo. When he came back to the hospital, his team noticed something different. Same strength, same focus, but a new softness in his voice, a slower blink, a steadier breath. Joe the nurse smiled. "You found your center again." Malcolm replied, "I never lost it. I just buried it." That afternoon, he submitted a proposal to the hospital board. Establish a bias and belonging task force. Create regular peer support spaces for minority staff. Launch a community trust clinic, bridging ER care with underserved neighborhoods. When they asked who would lead it, he said, "Not me, Ava. It's her time." That night, Malcolm stood outside the hospital under the stars. Ava joined him, coffee in hand. "You know," she said, "they're going to keep calling you a hero." He chuckled. "They can call me whatever they want. I just want to go home knowing I helped." She nodded. "Well, mission accomplished." Part 7. Passing the mic, holding the line. The hospital board approved the proposal. The Bias and Belonging Task Force launched in less than 6 weeks. Ava Jackson, sharp, focused, now freshly accepted into her residency, was named chair. Malcolm watched from the back of the auditorium as she gave her first address. "We're not fixing bias in one meeting, but we're naming it, tracking it, and most of all, we're not letting it hide anymore." He didn't need to say a word. His work was already speaking. Malcolm stepped back from public advocacy roles. No more press appearances. No more speaking tours. Instead, he returned full-time to medicine, but this time with boundaries. He started taking long weekends, cooking again, running in the mornings, living like he mattered outside of crisis. One afternoon, he received a call from a top-tier university. They wanted him to join the medical faculty as a visiting clinical professor of emergency ethics. He paused. "Why me?" The dean responded. "Because you don't just know how to save lives. You know how to protect dignity, and that's the kind of doctor we want our students to learn from." Malcolm thought about it. Teaching wasn't part of his plan, but he thought of Ava, of Jason, the 15-year-old who still emailed him every few weeks, of all the first-year students walking into hospitals unsure if they'd be respected, let alone believed. So he said yes. His first class was a standing room only. The lecture was titled, "When Care Isn't Enough, The Ethics of Being Seen." He stood in front of the students, looked around and said, "You're going to hear phrases like cultural competency and diversity hiring. I'm here to tell you, competency isn't the goal. Compassion is. You can know the science and still miss the soul. Don't let your degrees be a shield from humility." They were silent, writing, processing, changing. Back at the hospital, Ava's task force presented their first internal findings. 1 in 3 minority staff had experienced some form of bias in the last year. 70% said they never reported it. Many feared retaliation or being labeled difficult. Her voice didn't shake as she shared the numbers. "The problem isn't just incidents, it's silence. Our job is to make speaking up safer than staying quiet." Malcolm sat in the back, proud, quiet, watching the ripple become a wave. Jason, now 16, wrote again. "Dr. Ellison, I got into the medical magnet program. They asked who inspired me. I wrote your name. I hope I get to wear a white coat one day. But even if I don't, I'll never forget what you told me. Sometimes you don't see it because you're meant to be it." "Thank you." Malcolm printed the email, framed it, placed it next to his medical license. Lillian Morse, the woman whose life he saved, returned to the ER, not as a patient, but to donate. She worked with a non-profit to gift the hospital a new portable defibrillator unit in his name. On it, an engraved plate read, "In honor of Dr. Malcolm Ellison, who knelt to save a life." When others paused to question it, she hugged him tightly. "I'm here because you stood up," Malcolm whispered, "and I'm still standing." One evening, a young resident made a critical error. Nothing fatal, but enough to shake her confidence. Malcolm found her crying in the locker room. She stammered, I don't think I belong here." He sat beside her and said, "You do. You made a mistake, not a declaration about your future. Doctors fall, but real ones get back up wiser." She dried her tears. And later that night, she saved a life on her own. He wrote, "I used to think legacy meant making noise, but maybe it means building a space where others don't have to scream just to be seen." Part 8. The Quiet Impact. Malcolm walked the halls of the hospital like he always had, but now something had shifted. Not in him, in them. People listened more carefully, asked different questions, chose words with more care, not because of fear, but because of respect. Ava returned to the hospital, this time as a resident, not just a mentee. White coat crisp, confidence sharp. She joined Malcolm on rounds, and when a patient mistakenly turned to him after her diagnosis, he gently redirected, Dr. Jackson is leading this case. The patient nodded, a little surprised. Ava smiled, then proceeded like the professional she was. Later, she whispered, "Thanks for backing me up." Malcolm said, "You didn't need backup. You needed space, and you owned it." A national medical journal published an op-ed Malcolm wrote months earlier, titled, "When Your Credentials Aren't Enough, a Reflection on Unseen Medicine." It wasn't angry. It wasn't even reactive. It was human. One excerpt went viral. "My greatest victory wasn't saving a life at 37,000 feet. It was standing still when I was told to prove myself, and remembering I already had." One night, Malcolm received a call from his father. The man had always been proud, but reserved. This time, his voice was softer than usual. "Son, your mom showed me that article. I read it 3 times. I don't tell you enough, but I see you, and I wish my generation had men like you to look up to." Malcolm blinked back unexpected tears. "Thanks, Dad." "No, son, thank you." But even as the world applauded, reality returned. A patient refused to be seen by Ava. An older white man, mid-60s, scowled when she walked into the room. "I want a real doctor." Ava stood firm. "I am your doctor." He turned to the nurse. "Get me someone else." The nurse looked to Malcolm. He stepped in, not to replace her, but to support her. He calmly explained, "Dr. Jackson is board certified and perfectly capable. If you refuse treatment, that's your right, but disrespect is not." The man grumbled but didn't push further. Ava handled the case, and the patient got better, but that moment stayed with her. Later that night, Ava sat in the break room, stirring cold coffee. Malcolm joined her. "I'm okay," she said. "Just tired of always having to prove it." He nodded. "I know, but every time you stay, you plant something." She looked up. "Like what?" He smiled. "Like the next girl who walks into that room and doesn't have to explain why she's in charge." Jason, now 17, came to shadow Malcolm at the hospital. Still quiet, still curious, but more sure of himself. "I want to specialize in emergency medicine," he said. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Jason grinned. "Yeah, I like the pressure." Malcolm chuckled. "You'll fit right in." During his visit, Jason watched Ava perform a procedure and said, "She's a beast." Malcolm corrected him playfully. "She's a doctor. Let's start there." At the end of the semester, Georgetown's medical school surprised Malcolm with the Outstanding Clinical Educator Award. It came with a small ceremony. He didn't want a speech, but the dean insisted. So Malcolm stood up and said, "This isn't about me. It's about what happens when you stop asking people to justify their place in the room and start learning from why they stayed." Nearly a year after the infamous flight, the airline invited Malcolm for a formal apology event. They had retrained all crew, implemented clear guidelines across all routes, and added a new policy. No medical volunteer should be delayed by profiling. Period. He stood quietly at the ceremony, hands folded, watching. When the CEO handed him a plaque, he simply said, "Let's make sure this never happens again, to anyone." After the ceremony, a teenage girl approached him. "I'm Ruby. Lillian Morse was my grandma. She passed away last month." Malcolm's face fell. "I'm sorry to hear that," Ruby smiled. "She always talked about the man who saved her. Said you didn't just give her more time, you gave her hope." She pulled something from her purse, an envelope. "Before she passed, she asked me to give you this." Inside was a note. "Dear Dr. Ellison, you reminded me what kindness looked like under pressure. My heart may be slowing down, but I leave this world knowing men like you are still in it. That's enough for me." Malcolm held the letter to his chest for a long time. That night, Malcolm walked alone through D.C. No camera flashes, no interviews, just warm street light and quiet pavement. He thought of Lillian, of Ava, of Jason, of the thousands of others who would never know his name, but might walk a little taller because of his choices. And then he whispered to himself, "You can't save the world in one flight, but you can change its course." Chapitre la Fournie, Part 9. The Long Echo. The ER was quiet when Malcolm clocked in, that kind of quiet that never lasted. He had learned to appreciate it anyway. He wasn't chasing heroism anymore, just consistency, a calm voice in a storm, A steady hand on someone's worst day. That was enough. The clear policy had now been adopted by 5 major airlines. Medical schools across the country were using his story as part of their ethics curriculum. Students messaged him regularly. "We watched your keynote. Your story helped me stay in school. You're the reason I didn't give up after being mistaken for a nurse." Again. He responded to as many as he could, because he remembered what it felt like to wonder if anyone was listening. Ava had completed her first year of residency and was invited to lead training sessions for incoming interns. Malcolm watched from the observation window as she stood before a crowd in scrubs, breaking down real-world bias scenarios with clarity and control. One of the new residents said, "She reminds me of you." Malcolm smiled. "She's better." Jason, now 18, started his college pre-med program in New York. On his first day, he texted Malcolm, "They put me in biolab with all these Ivy League kids. I felt like I didn't belong until I remembered your voice. Sometimes you don't see it because you're meant to be it." Malcolm replied simply, "Now go be it." Then the news broke. A young black man had died in police custody just 10 minutes from the hospital. He had been walking home from his night shift at a local diner. No charges were filed. Protests erupted. Malcolm didn't watch the news. He treated the protesters when they came in with tear gas burns and bruises. He didn't give interviews. He listened. He stood outside the hospital one night, watching a candlelight vigil. And when someone handed him a candle, he took it, lit it, and held it high. That week, one of his med students asked during a lecture, "Dr. Ellison, what's the point of healing people if the world keeps breaking them?" Malcolm paused, then said, "Because if we stop healing, the world wins, and we don't treat just bodies. We treat the belief that people deserve to live." Silence followed, but not doubt, just reflection. Malcolm was invited to join a panel titled, "Where Medicine Meets Justice." He almost declined, but Ava called him out. "You always told me to speak up when the moment felt hard. This moment needs you." So he went. During the panel, a moderator asked, "You've changed an industry, influenced law, inspired thousands. What now?" Malcolm replied, "I keep showing up, because showing up in scrubs, in classrooms, in communities is the loudest way I know how to fight back." Then he added, "Justice isn't always in the courtroom. Sometimes it starts in the exam room, when we look someone in the eye and say, 'I believe you, I see you, and I'm here.'" Lillian's pastor reached out to Malcolm with an invitation. The church had created an annual health awareness event in her memory and wanted to name it the Ellison and Morse Community Healing Fair. He agreed to attend, and when he arrived, he saw hundreds of people in the church courtyard. Free screenings, volunteer doctors, mental health booths, kids playing with toy stethoscopes. One little girl ran up to him. "Are you the doctor who helped Grandma Lillian?" Malcolm knelt. "I am." She handed him a crayon drawing of him in a white coat, flying. He laughed softly. "You made me a superhero." She grinned. "You are one." Later that night, back at the hospital, a new patient arrived. Elderly, alone, frightened. He whispered, "I don't have insurance." Malcolm held his hand. "You have me. That's enough for now." As the shift ended, Malcolm walked to his locker. He opened it slowly, revealing his framed letter from Jason, his first stethoscope, Lillian's final note, and a handwritten card that simply read, "Thank you for staying." He touched the items one by one, then closed the locker gently and whispered, "Still here." Part 10. Clear skies ahead. The one-year anniversary of Flight 727 passed quietly. No breaking news, no headlines, no hashtags. But for Dr. Malcolm Ellison, it marks something deeper, a full circle, not just in time, but in transformation. The hospital unveiled a mural in the pediatric wing, painted by local artists and children. It showed a figure in a white coat with outstretched arms, children of all colors holding hands looking up, a plane in the sky leaving a glowing trail, and below it the words, "Sometimes healing takes off in the most unexpected places." Malcolm stood silently before it, sunglasses on, heart full. He didn't ask for this, but he was grateful anyway. Ava completed her rotation with the highest honors. She was offered a permanent faculty position in internal medicine and bias training. Her first lecture was called Belief as a Form of Care. She opened with a simple line, "I stand here because someone believed I could, before anyone else did." She never said Malcolm's name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Jason applied for early admission to medical school. In his interview, the panel asked who inspired him. He replied, "A doctor who saved a woman on a plane. But that's not why I want to be like him. It's because he stayed. After the applause faded, he kept showing up. And that's the kind of doctor I want to be." He was accepted. The airline invited Malcolm to join a private gathering with the original crew of Flight 727, including the flight attendant who had once questioned him. She approached him nervously, older, wiser, changed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I want you to know I've spent this past year learning." Malcolm looked at her, really looked. "I forgave you a long time ago," he said, "but I'm glad you didn't forget." They shook hands, then hugged, because some wounds don't close with anger, only with understanding. At Georgetown, Malcolm gave one last class before transitioning into a quieter, part-time role. It wasn't about diagnosis, treatment plans, or statistics. It was about humanity. Medicine will challenge your hands, but life will challenge your heart. There will be days when you'll be the only one who believes your patient matters, and those will be the days that define you. One student raised a hand. "Dr. Ellison, what do you believe defines you?" Malcolm smiled. "The moment I chose to help, even when someone told me I couldn't." Malcolm took a flight not as a doctor, but as a passenger. No medical emergencies, no ID checks. Just him, a book, and a window seat. As the plane ascended, he looked down at the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel it again. Peace. Not because the world was fixed, but because he'd done his part. That night, he wrote in his journal, the final page. "I wasn't trying to be a symbol. I was just trying to be useful. I showed up not because I was invited, but because someone needed me. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not always fixing what's broken, but refusing to leave it alone." He closed the journal, tucked it in a drawer, and turned out the light. 10 years later, a girl boards a flight in Atlanta, wearing a white coat with a stethoscope in her bag. She's young, nervous. As the plane takes off, a call goes out over the intercom. "If there is a doctor on board, please make yourself known." She stands, walks down the aisle, confident, unafraid, because someone once did it before her, and because now she knows she belongs. But at the end,